Felicia McGuire. Felicia McGuire devastated her family and friends when she disappeared on October 7, 2007, at the age of 32. She was last seen alive by witnesses in the Dorchester district of Boston. The police conducted extensive investigations and large-scale searches. She was never found, however. She disappeared under unclear circumstances, and the police were notified of suspicious activities by a person of interest. But soon, the investigation was closed, providing no closure for Felicia's loved ones. The Boston, Massachusetts neighborhood of Dorchester is situated in the city's southern region. It is Boston's largest neighborhood with a total land area of almost 6 square miles. Over 90,000 people from various ethnic backgrounds live in Dorchester, including Irish Americans, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, and Vietnamese Americans. Dorchester is now a rapidly developing neighborhood in Boston as a result of recent residential and commercial construction. This case we are looking at today takes place in this area. Felicia McGuire was born in 1975 in the lovely city of Dorchester. Although her father's identity is unknown, she was raised by her mother, Sharon McGuire. Felicia spent her formative years in a joyful household filled with love and laughter. She gave birth to her only son in 1997 and named him Nicholas Fahey. After the birth of her son, Nicholas became the core of her entire universe. It wasn't clear who Nicholas's father was and what had happened to him, however, remained a mystery. Felicia never left Dorchester. She continued to reside there with her cherished son and her mother, building a home that was warm and loving, regardless of the obstacles and difficulties life hurled at her. Over the years, Felicia got into a relationship with a man by the name of David Pina. She also shared a home with him. Despite the difficulties of being a single parent, Felicia never wavered in her commitment to her child's welfare. She put forth endless effort to make sure her child had the finest life possible. She went above and beyond to provide her child the attention and assistance he needed. Felicia McGuire was a great example of a selfless and devoted mother who prioritized the needs of her child before her own. She never let life's challenges break her spirit. Unfortunately, all her efforts to see her child excel and become a great person in the society came to a stop when on October 7, 2007, Felicia McGuire disappeared without a trace. The 32-year-old devoted mother was last seen in Boston, Massachusetts' Dorchester area, where she lived. Nobody is aware of what happened to her after being seen going about her business on Rixton Street. Sharon, Felicia's mother, was devastated by the disappearance of her daughter. And the confusion surrounding Felicia's whereabouts only made matters worse. She looked through every telephone directory and potential contact she could think of, but her effort yielded no result. Felicia's failure to get in touch with her friends and family as the days passed by caused them to worry more and more. After 10 days, on October 18, 2007, Sharon McGuire finally reported her daughter missing. The Boston Police Department immediately got to work and opened an investigation into her disappearance. They soon found out that Felicia's behavior was not normal and that she had ceased speaking with her beloved son and other family members. This raised concerns that she may have been the victim of a terrible incident. Since it was not in her character to vanish without informing anyone, Felicia's family was very concerned for her safety and well-being. They wondered where she could be and what had happened to her. Her son and family had to deal with the lingering doubts about her fate. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement personnel put in a lot of effort to find any information that would help them solve the mystery. In an effort to piece together a timeline of Felicia's final known movements, detectives questioned members of her family, acquaintances, and neighbors. A thorough search of the neighborhood, including neighboring woodlands and bodies of water, was also carried out in an effort to find the missing woman. Felicia's family got more worried as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. They never stopped wondering where their cherished mother and daughter was. The Boston Police Department was concerned about her disappearance as well. Because of the lack of information, They posted pictures of Felicia McGuire on social media in November 2013 in an effort to get any information that would help bring her home safely. They gave a thorough description of her in the social media posts. The police voiced great concern for her safety and well-being and listed her physical characteristics, including her height, weight, hair, and eye color. Felicia was a stunning woman with chestnut brown hair and piercing, life-filled eyes. She was a slim 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 140 pounds, and had a medium frame. Felicia had been missing for more than 6 hard years, and as each day went by, the mystery surrounding her absence grew complex. Despite investing a significant amount of time and resources in the search for leads, her body had never been located. However, following the Facebook post in 2013, several witnesses' report of Felicia's disappearance remained suspicious. An unnamed witness who reportedly lived below Felicia McGuire and David Pina's flat in 2007 told the police that he remembers Pina, Felicia's live-in boyfriend, showing up at his door in the early hours of October 7, 2007, asking for a ride to his mother's house in Devon Street. The neighbor noticed blood on his clothes, but at the time, Pina had claimed that Felicia had stabbed him with scissors. However, the blood on Pina's shirt suggested something much more heinous had happened. The witness claimed that Pina informed him that during their fight, had pushed Felicia against the wall with force, striking her head on the bed or dresser as a result. Pina then said he didn't know if she was still alive and seemed unconcerned about her fate. The witness continued to make observations of Pina. He claimed Pina's right hand was also swollen. When questioned why, Pina stated that Felicia had hit him with a baseball bat. Days later, 2 additional witnesses asserted that they had seen Pina return to the apartment on the same evening. According to them, around 3 or 4 in the morning that day, Payne returned home with another man and went upstairs. After some time had passed, they returned, dragging a blanket that may have contained Felicia McGuire's body down the stairs. The 2 witnesses attempted to assist but were turned away and told to mind their own business. To add to the mystery, another witness claimed that in 2007, after lending Pina his 2005 Chevy Impala in exchange for narcotics, he received it back with a shattered and freshly cleaned back seat. As the investigation went on, these troubling details led the police to suspect David Pina and raise doubts about what actually happened to Felicia McGuire. Without delay, investigators questioned David Pina about the case. They also discovered that he had a violent past with Felicia. Pina told investigators he was Felicia McGuire's live-in boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, and their relationship was anything but easy. Since Pina had previously told the first witness who had called the police that he and Felicia had engaged in a violent altercation at their apartment, the police questioned him about it. He then admitted that Felicia attacked him with a pair of scissors, stabbing him in the shoulder. Pina reacted by leaving the apartment and seeking safety at his mother's house, but when he came back a few days later, he made an unexpected discovery. Felicia had left, and her belongings had been taken. After the interview, investigators were forced to release Pina because there was no evidence against him, and he made no incriminating statements. Following this, the investigation into Felicia's death was a torturous journey full of detours that eventually led to every possible dead end. Although every lead was pursued and every piece of evidence was examined, the case grew colder with each passing day. Felicia's family and friends were in excruciating pain and desperately wanted explanations for her disappearance. For years, rumors and conjecture have been circulating regarding the whereabouts of Felicia McGuire, the adored mother who disappeared in 2007 without a trace. In 2017, when the FBI conducted a search in a heavily forested area of West Roxbury, fresh hope was generated. Days of investigation were conducted in secrecy with no information provided to the press, leaving the public to speculate as to what had brought the authorities to that location. The truth came out in the end. The investigation into Felicia's disappearance was in fact related to the search, and it was an essential step in the drawn-out process of learning the truth. The search turned up a witness who told the detectives the shocking information that David Pina had requested his assistance in removing items from his apartment in 2007, including a heavy rolled-up carpet. He added that Pena and his accomplice had placed Felicia's body in the trunk of a car before speeding off. The witness who saw this claimed that he instantly had the suspicion that a body was wrapped in the carpet and blanket. Sadly, he was right in his assumptions. Finally, with the aid of the witness, Pina was able to carry Felicia's body into a wooded area with a parking lot where they dumped Felicia's body. The investigators were almost close to solving the case, but they needed to find the location where Felicia's body was dumped. However, the solution to this seemed to be a mystery that would never be solved despite numerous leads and witnesses. Before learning what happened to her remains, the witness left the scene. It was even made worse by the fact that the witness had no knowledge of Boston and was unable to offer any suggestions as to where the body might have been dumped. The prosecutor was unable to offer closure to McGuire's family and loved ones because they had been given a frustratingly incomplete picture of the crime. A few years later, on January 14, 2023, David Pina was successfully arrested by the Boston Police Department's fugitive unit at the Florida's Baker County Detention Center. Pina was wanted for a murder charge related to Felicia's case from Dorchester District Court, and he also had an outstanding warrant from Suffolk Superior Court for trafficking cocaine. Felicia left her young son behind when she disappeared from Roxton Street in Dorchester more than 15 years ago. Her family and friends who have been looking for her for so long may finally get some answers thanks to Pina's arrest. On February 15, 2023, Pina showed up in court for his arraignment on the charges leveled against him. After more than 15 years of uncertainty and heartache, the case has attracted national attention, and this most recent development has revived hopes of discovering Felicia's remains. The family of Felicia McGuire now has some sliver of hope. Despite the fact that her body was never discovered, police have reason to believe that her remains are still somewhere in the Boston region. An investigation that had remained cold for a while has now received some resolution following the news of an arrest. Even though it was unable to bring their beloved Felicia back, Felicia's family and friends may finally rest easy, knowing that someone will be held responsible for her terrible abduction. Eventually, we hope, justice will be served. Pina is due to appear in court and is probably going to stand trial shortly. During this difficult time, Felicia's family and friends are in our prayers and thoughts. We can only hope that they may find some peace and comfort as they continue to heal from this unfathomable loss. What are your thoughts on this case? Kindly use the comment box below to share your thoughts. Moving on to the next case. Sophia McKenna. Sophia McKenna, 21, and her two siblings were raised in North Stonington, Connecticut. She lived with her mother, Michelle McKenna, when her parents were divorced. Her mental health suffered as a result of her parents' divorce, and in high school, she received a bipolar depression diagnosis. Austin Pero Cordova was her lover. Her mother claimed that the relationship was abusive. Both used to argue a lot, which sometimes turned physical. Austin apparently was seeing someone else, which of course made Sophia mad. One day, Sophia was to meet Austin, but told her mother that she was going out with some other guy and not with Austin. When Austin found out about it, he apparently became incredibly angry and went to Sophia's apartment. When Sophia wouldn't open the apartment door to let him in, he tried to kick her apartment door down and threatened to kill her. According to the police report, his exact words were, "I'll slit your throat." Meanwhile, Sophia began increasing the time she spent with Warren Spencer Mugford, 20, who grew up in Florida and had attended school at the University of Connecticut's Avery Point campus located in Groton, Connecticut. Spencer and Sophia were close friends and hung out together many times. They became friends while working at the Red Door Salon and Spa, an upscale day spa located in Mystic Marriott Hotel in Groton, Connecticut. They would eventually start dating but would break it off and decide to simply remain friends. Spencer had recently begun working at a local fishing charter where he took small groups of people out on the water for half-day fishing trips. Spencer grew up on the water and was a strong swimmer. On May 27, 2018, in the early morning hours around 1 a.m., Sophia and Spencer decided to go on a night trip to New London Ledge Lighthouse off the coast of Groton, Connecticut. Sophia had apparently received permission from Austin to go out with Spencer on the trip. Sophia and Spencer parked her car at the University of Connecticut, Avery Point campus. They then used one of the university's sailboats, a white 14-foot sunfish without a mast, and paddled their way to the lighthouse. The lighthouse is rumored to be haunted, and this may have encouraged their decision to visit it at night. The story goes that in the 1920s or 1930s, the keeper of the lighthouse, a man named John Randolph, was so distraught that his wife had run off with a local ferry captain that he jumped from the roof to his death. No records have been discovered to confirm or deny this, yet it's believed that his spirit still haunts the lighthouse. Since then, many have reported strange phenomenon at the lighthouse, like doors opening and closing by themselves, unexplained knockings, bed sheets flying off of beds, cups moving around, boats unmooring themselves, TVs and radios turning on and off, the foghorn spontaneously sounding on its own, and other unexplained happenings. On that night, the temperature was below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. While out on the water, Sophia used Spencer's phone to post the video to his Snapchat. The video was of Sophia and Spencer out in the ocean. Spencer can be seen sitting on the bow of a small mastless sailboat paddling. Sophia pans the camera around to show the lights on the coastline behind them. A few minutes later, at 2 a.m., a photo was posted on Spencer's account. The photo that was uploaded was a picture of Sophia at the lighthouse. She was happy and had her tongue out with a big smile. From the picture, it appears she is standing on the stairs that go from a 2-foot wide lower ledge to the much wider upper platform right in front of a no trespassing sign in the lighthouse. This means that they made it out to the lighthouse. But what happened to them after that is a mystery. The next day, Spencer had a very important event to attend that he would not have missed. When he did not show up for the event and his family and friends couldn't reach him, he was reported missing. Meanwhile, Austin reached out to Sophia's mother and told her he was worried about Sophia as he hadn't been able to get in touch with her. Michelle had let her younger daughter play with her phone that morning. When Michelle got her phone from her to call the police, she noticed there were 7 missed calls from an unknown number. The calls came back to back. The first missed call was from 2:05 a.m., and then 2:06 a.m., and then 2:07 a.m. Then there were 3 missed calls at 2:08 a.m., and the last missed call came in at 2:09. None of the missed calls resulted in a voicemail. Sophia's mom later stated that she was sleeping and missed the calls. She tried calling the number back, but it went to voicemail. The voicemail said, "You've reached Spencer's cell phone. Please leave a message." As Spencer didn't know her number, she knew it had to be Sophia trying to reach her. Realizing something had gone horribly wrong, she immediately contacted police and reported her missing. The U.S. Coast Guard began their search for the young adults at approximately 6 p.m. that evening. Michelle desperately tried to get anyone she could involved in the search, but the Coast Guard advised against that due to harsh weather conditions. Sophia's car would be found parked on the campus with her cell phone still inside. This would explain why she was using Spencer's phone to Snapchat and to call her mother. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on May 27th, the shirt Spencer had been wearing in the Snapchat photo was found tied to a cleat at the New London Ledge Lighthouse. It's believed that Spencer used his shirt to dock the boat at the lighthouse. The following day, on May 28th, Austin and his father decided to go on their own to search for Sophia and Spencer. While flying in a private plane, they spotted a sailboat similar to the one Sophia and Spencer had piloted. It was a small, 14-foot sunfish sailboat that was laying upside down on the Truman Beach in New York, approximately 8 miles east of the lighthouse. Police believed it was the boat used by Sophia and Spencer. However, this has never been confirmed as 100% accurate because they reported the pair was on a paddleboard. They claimed that the broken paddle was inside the upside-down boat. The boat was described to have growth in the hull and partially was buried in the dirt and rock with a light layer of dust and dirt, which would have been impossible unless the boat had been there for many days and not for the only 24 hours it was supposed to have been. Also, pictures that were taken of the boat as evidence showed unidentified fingerprints on the boat, but no fingerprints were taken to be analyzed. The Coast Guard would suspend their search on the night of May 28th due to rough seas. They told the family that they searched everywhere they could and cannot resume the search unless something is found to steer searchers in a different direction. On June 8, 2018, 11 days after the disappearance, the body of Spencer Mugford was found by commercial fishermen floating shoeless in the ocean, nearly 2.5 miles from Ledge Lighthouse in the opposite direction from where the boat was found. The boat went one way and Spencer went the other way. His cause of death was determined to be drowning. Although Spencer was now found, they did not resume the search for Sophia. In addition to Spencer and Sophia going missing, 2 other men had gone missing that same day, although it is not specified at what time they went missing. Their bodies would eventually be found as well, but Sophia's never would be. Although there was no body and no indication that she drowned, police believe she is not missing, but already dead. The family does not know if Sophia called anyone else that night to ask for help. Spencer's cell phone has not been found, and his cell phone records have not been released. So far, no witnesses have stepped forward. It is unknown if the 2 were followed or had someone else with them that night. The security cameras at the college and the lighthouse were reported to be merely decoy cameras. There is no video evidence available at this time. On July 22, 2018, Finding Sophia McKenna, What Happened to Sophia Facebook group, was formed to find answers to some of the questions that people have been wondering, such as why was the search ended so quickly when other searches go on for many days? Where is Spencer's phone, and why have they not checked all of the phone records of Spencer knowing that his was the last phone to be in Sophia's possession? And most of all, why were the fingerprints from the boat never analyzed? These are just a few questions that still linger in people's minds. Now, after reading all the facts about this case, we came up with this likely possibility, and it seems we're not the only ones. Many other Redditors have picked up on it as well. So here's what we believe might have happened that night. On that night, after leaving their car at the campus, Sophia and Spencer took the boat and paddled their way to the lighthouse. After using his shirt to moor the boat to the lighthouse, both went into the lighthouse and took the Snapchat photo of Sophia. Shortly after, the boat came loose and started drifting away from the lighthouse. Since the boat was their only way off the lighthouse, Spencer, who was a strong swimmer, gave his phone to Sophia and jumped into the water to get the boat back to the lighthouse. At that time of night, the water must have been really cold, and since Spencer had already paddled their way to the lighthouse, he must have been extremely tired and exhausted. He probably started struggling in the water and drowned. After a few minutes, Sophia becomes worried and starts calling out to him. When she doesn't hear anything, she begins to panic. Now, since they had stolen a boat and were already trespassing, she might have thought against calling 911. It is also worth noting that Spencer had been charged with a DUI 5 days prior, and Sophia had been arrested in February for breach of peace and assault along with Austin. So she wouldn't want to get in trouble with the police again. So she instead decides to call her mother for help, but all her calls go unanswered. Now frantic, Sophia starts calling out for Spencer again, kneeling near the edge of the water. At some point, it's possible she may have slipped and fallen into the water. The current may have been too strong for her, and she too would have drowned. Sophia was not a strong swimmer, so it's within reason to think that she wouldn't have jumped after Spencer willingly. Moreover, if she did decide to jump after Spencer, she would have wanted to leave Spencer's phone behind in the lighthouse to make sure the phone doesn't get water damage, and so she could call someone after. But the phone was never found in the lighthouse. Naturally, this is only a theory, and there is a chance that foul play is at play. It was the start of Memorial Day weekend, and many boaters celebrate at this time, so a lot of people were out on the river. Normally, the black of night at 2 in the morning is not a popular time on the water. Could they have been discovered? Or did someone find Sophia and take her while she was yelling for Spencer? Sophia's relatives remained hopeful that she was still alive and possibly being detained against her choice. Moving on to the next case. Tanya van Kalenborg. The adventurous and free-spirited Tanya van Kalenborg was born in Saanich, British Columbia, Canada, on March 7, 1969. Her bold decision to attend her high school prom wearing a man's tuxedo was a sign of her rebellious spirit as a child and an early indication of her independence and unorthodoxy. Tanya's decision to travel throughout Europe with her best friend, May Robeson, just before meeting her future lover, Jay Cook, demonstrated her love of travel and her curiosity about the world. She was deeply impacted by this experience, which influenced her desire to travel more and stay away from obligations that would restrict her. Tanya had obligations, even though she preferred to live a nomadic existence. To fund her adventures, she worked part-time as both a dog walker and a waitress at Pickwick's, a British-themed restaurant in Vancouver City. Her decision to skip college and work towards her goal of traveling reflected her determination to chart her own path. Born on December 16, 1966, J. Roland Cook hailed from Saanich, British Columbia. By the time 1987 rolled around, Jay, at 20 years old, was grappling with a sense of directionlessness. Uncertain about his future, he faced the pressures of adulthood without a clear vision of his goals. Raised in a family with a strong work ethic instilled by his father, Gordon J., along with his two sisters, contributed to the family business, Cook and Talbot Limited Heating Specialists, a small family-run company specializing in furnace installations. Although Jay was contemplating a shift toward marine biology, he engaged in the family business to occupy his time. Jay's reputation as a responsible and reliable individual stretched back to his high school days. At social gatherings, he demonstrated his caring nature by intervening when a friend faced potential harm due to excessive drinking. He once abandoned his job at a pizza parlor to cycle through rain for 3 hours to join friends, showcasing his spontaneous and lively side. Jay's life took a significant turn when he met Tanya through a mutual friend in July of the same year. Tanya was drawn to Jay's caring and responsible demeanor, and their relationship quickly blossomed. Despite uncertainties about his own future, Jay's willingness to take on challenges and his dynamic personality endeared him to those around him. Tanya and Jay's relationship, though relatively short-lived, was marked by a sense of adventure. Tanya's initial hesitance towards settling down was juxtaposed with Jay's eagerness to carve out a future together. Their decision to embark on a work-related trip to Seattle reflected not only their commitment to each other, but also their shared enthusiasm for new experiences. Unfortunately, this trip would take a dark turn that would cost both Tanya and Jay their lives. The plan involved a scenic route starting with a ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles, Washington, followed by a drive through various highways to eventually reach Seattle. Initially, Tanya tried to invite her best friend May to join them on the trip, but May had to decline due to illness. Reflecting later, May could not shake off the guilt, wondering if her presence might have altered the tragic events that unfolded. The young couple embarked on their journey on November 18, 1987, in Jay's father's 1977 Ford Club van. The purpose of the trip was for Jay to pick up the furnace from a supplier in Seattle. Despite a minor detour and a missed turnoff, the first leg of their journey seemed uneventful. However, the last confirmed sighting of Jay and Tanya was at a ferry terminal in Bremerton at 10:16 p.m., where they purchased a ticket to Seattle. The following morning, when the supplier waited in vain for them to collect the furnace, concerns set in. The Van Keelenbergs and Cooks, both families linked by the missing couple, reported them missing on November 20th. Despite mounting worry, law enforcement hesitated to open a full-scale investigation, citing the lack of evidence of foul play. As the families anxiously waited, Bill Van Kuylenborg, a lawyer, took matters into his own hands. Frustrated by the lack of progress, he organized a helicopter search, but the vastness of Washington state thwarted his efforts. On November 24th, a devastating discovery was made when Tanya's half-naked body was found in a ditch near Parson Creek Road in Skagit County. She had been assaulted and bound with plastic ties and an execution-style shot in the head. Tanya's father, Bill Van Kuylenberg, was called in to identify his daughter. Following the gruesome discovery of Tanya Van Kuylenberg's lifeless body near Parson Creek Road, investigators uncovered several crucial pieces of evidence that further deepened the mystery and horror surrounding the case. A bartender at Essie's Tavern in Bellingham reported finding Tanya's wallet and a set of keys behind the bar. Initially considered lost property, the bartender's realization prompted by news of Tanya's case led to him contacting the police. The wallet's contents were identified as belonging to Tanya, sparking a closer examination of the area. As investigators delved into the surroundings, additional clues began to surface. Zip ties similar to the ones used to bind Tanya were discovered, linking the crime scene to the one at Essie's Tavern. This detail suggested a potential connection between the location where her belongings were found and her slaying. The investigation took a pivotal turn when the team located a van matching the description given by Bill Van Kuylenberg. Jay Cook had been driving this van, and it was found in proximity to Tanya's body. Upon inspection, the inside of the van revealed a grim reality. It was covered in blood belonging to both Tanya and Jay. The state of the van, coupled with the blood evidence, raised immediate concerns about Jay's well-being. Initially considered a potential suspect due to his unknown whereabouts, Jay Cook was now viewed as another victim. The evidence strongly suggested that he too had met a tragic end, dispelling earlier suspicions that he was involved and perhaps responsible for what had happened to Tanya. On November 26th, a man named Scott Walker stumbled upon Jay Cook's lifeless body during a hunting trip in Snohomish County, just 50 miles from where Tanya had been found. If Tanya's crime scene had been gruesome, Jay's discovery was arguably even more chilling. The scene was grim with dog collars and twine tightly wound around Jay's neck. Disturbingly, tissues and a pack of cigarettes had been shoved down his throat, causing asphyxiation. Severe head wounds and bloodstains on his clothes suggested he had been subjected to brutal violence, possibly even torture. The timeline of events surrounding Jay's end became a critical aspect of the investigation. Given that the couple's van was found closer to Tanya's body than to Jay's, it was reasoned that Jay's life might have been taken first. The disturbing implication was that the perpetrator might have eliminated Jay to facilitate the assault on Tanya without any hindrance. The grisly details of Jay's demise painted a horrifying picture, leaving investigators grappling with the enormity of the crimes committed against the young couple. As law enforcement worked tirelessly to piece together the sequence of events, the haunting question of who was responsible for such brutal acts loomed large. While Jay's discovery provided some closure to his family, it intensified the urgency of solving the case. With both victims now confirmed to not be alive anymore, the focus shifted to unraveling the identity of the perpetrator responsible. In the aftermath of the brutal slayings of Tanya Van Kuylenberg and Jay Cook, their families faced a new wave of torment in December 1987. An anonymous letter writer claiming to be the man responsible sent threatening letters to both families. As investigators delved into the letters, the anonymous writer was eventually eliminated as a suspect, leaving the families with more questions than answers. Detective Jim Scharf, deeply affected by the heinous nature of the unsolved case, played a pivotal role in seeking justice. In 1995, he helped form a cold case team, and the case of Tanya and Jay became one of their earliest assignments. The quest for answers took a significant turn in May 2003, when investigators examined the van belonging to the victims. Among the critical pieces of evidence found were Tanya's black pants, on which male DNA was discovered. The DNA did not match Jay Cook. This unidentified DNA labeled individual A became a crucial focus for investigators. Despite uploading the profile to CODIS, the FBI's National Offender Database in 2003, there were no hits, leaving the case in a frustrating standstill. Over the years, Detective Sharp faced numerous theories and false leads with over 200 names crossing his desk. In 2015, a woman named Chelsea Rustard, who was unrelated to the victims, uploaded her DNA to a public database to explore her family tree. Little did she know that her DNA would become a crucial piece in unlocking the mystery of what had happened to Tanya and Jay. The breakthrough finally came on April 25, 2018. Inspired by the Golden State offender's arrest, Detective Sharp, eager to leverage the same technology, collaborated with Parabon Nanolabs and genetic genealogist C.C. Moore. Individual A's DNA was uploaded to GEDmatch, and within hours, Moore identified second cousins, enabling her to construct a detailed family tree. The name that came up was William Earl Talbot II. To confirm the match, investigators trailed Tabith, a trucker, until they were able to retrieve a discarded paper coffee cup. Forensic scientist Lisa Collins subsequently confirmed the match between the DNA on Talbot's cup and individual A. On May 17, 2018, after over 3 decades of searching for answers, William Earl Talbot II was arrested. The families of Tanya Van Keulenborg and Jay Cook, who had endured years of uncertainty, were notified of this significant development. For Detective Sharp, it was a momentous occasion, bringing a sense of closure and justice to one of the most perplexing unsolved cases he had encountered. In June 2019, William Earl Talbot II was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for taking the lives of Tanya Van Keulenborg and Jay Cook. However, on December 7, 2021, an appellate court overturned the conviction due to juror bias. This decision led to the possibility of a second trial. The appellate court dismissed the idea of a retrial on December 22, 2022. On the same day, however, the Washington State Supreme Court intervened and upheld the guilty conviction. The defense's decision to not dismiss the disputed juror through peremptory challenges was highlighted by the court. On December 22, 2022, Talbot is still being held. Moving on to the next case. Jeremy Stoner. On July 16, 1980, Jeremy Stoner was born in California. He had 3 siblings: Justin, his younger brother, and Jason and Joshua, his 2 elder brothers. They resided in the charming and picturesque city of Vallejo, California. Jason was a cheerful and energetic youngster. He cherished his friends and family. He enjoyed going to school and learning new things. He liked to ride his bike, play with his toys, and watch cartoons. He had a bright smile and a big heart. On Saturday morning, February 21, 1987, 6-year-old Jeremy was playing outside with his 2 older brothers, aged 9 and 11, near their house. Jeremy and his brothers were being watched by a relative while their parents were at work. Their relative had to leave suddenly to take her sick daughter to the emergency room. The boys were told to stay home until their parents returned. Instead, they headed over to a neighbor's house. While there, a neighbor scolded Jeremy for spilling ketchup, and they left. The boy's mother returned home at 4 p.m. to find the house empty, and she assumed the boys were playing at a neighbor's as they often did. But when the 2 older boys returned without Jeremy 2 hours later, the family launched a search effort. With Jeremy nowhere to be seen, they called the police. Vallejo police quickly determined Jeremy had been kidnapped. The last sighting of him was believed to be at a Dairy Queen on Springs Road, about a 5-minute walk from the family home. A worker there told investigators they saw Jeremy with an adult man around 7:30 that evening. 4 days later, on February 25, 1987, Jeremy's body was found on Sherman Island in Sacramento County. 4 people driving down Sherman Island Road in the Delta found themselves stuck in the mud. The driver got out to look for something to wedge under the tires. Instead, she discovered the body of a little boy. He had been assaulted, stabbed, and strangled. They called the police and told them about the discovery they made. Investigators arrived at the crime scene soon after. They collected all the evidence they could and stored it for future use. The news of Jeremy's demise spread quickly in Vallejo. The people were outraged and heartbroken by what happened to him. They felt sorry for his family and wanted to support them in any way they could. They gave them flowers, cards, and hugs. They searched for Jeremy when he was missing. They held a candlelight vigil for him. They also prayed for him and his family. The mayor of Vallejo at that time was Terry Curtola. He said that the people of Vallejo became part of the Stoner family for 4 days. He reiterated that they searched, cried, and prayed for him. It was not long until a suspect walked right into the Vallejo Police Department. About a week after Jeremy lost his life, an unemployed security guard named Sean Quincy Melton told police he may have information about the case. By his own admission, Melton said he wanted to impress detectives with his amateur investigation. He wanted, in his own words, to be a big shot. Video of his interrogation, though, showed the slow transformation of Melton from a swaggering sleuth to a bewildered crime suspect. He had a troubled past and a disturbing mindset, as evidenced by his authorship of a book titled The Wolf's Den, which depicted child exploitation. Although he claimed it was a work of fiction, some doubted that it was entirely detached from his own experiences. Sean Melton voluntarily visited the police station to provide information related to the case. He indicated that he had heard rumors and witnessed certain things that might aid in locating the perpetrator. However, the police held suspicions about his involvement in the crime. Their skepticism regarding Sean Melton was based on a legitimate reason. Before his visit, his psychologist had alerted the authorities and revealed that Sean Melton had confessed to having disturbing fantasies involving young boys. The psychologist expressed concerns that Sean Melton might pose a danger and could potentially be linked to Jeremy Stoner's case. The police subjected Sean Melton to an extensive 30-hour interrogation, during which they posed numerous questions and administered a polygraph test. They also created a sketch of him and compared it to a witness's description of the abductor. Their objective was to obtain information and potentially ascertain his involvement in the case. Sean Melton vehemently denied any involvement in the crime, asserting his innocence and claiming no knowledge of the case. He successfully passed the polygraph test, and the sketch of him did not match the witness's description. He maintained that his sole intention was to assist the police in solving the case. However, the police persisted in their pursuit of Sean Melton and put forward a new hypothesis. They alleged that Sean Melton suffered from multiple personality disorders and suggested that one of his alter egos named John Wolfe could have been the perpetrator. They contended that Sean Melton had no recollection of these actions. In response, the authorities arrested Sean Melton, charging him with kidnapping as well as taking Jeremy's life. Nevertheless, they lacked sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. 2 trials were conducted, but on both occasions the juries could not reach a unanimous verdict. Consequently, the judge was compelled to dismiss the case. Sean Melton passed away in 2000 without ever admitting to any involvement in Jeremy Stoner's tragic fate. The case of Jeremy Stoner remained unsolved for many years, classified as a cold case due to the lack of progress and the absence of fresh leads or evidence. However, in 2023, a significant development occurred in Jeremy Stoner's case. The police received a new lead thanks to an advanced technology known as DNA testing. DNA, a unique genetic code present in every individual's body, can be instrumental in identifying a person or their familial connections. The police harness DNA testing to compare samples obtained from Jeremy's remains with those in a criminal database. This breakthrough held the promise of shedding new light on the long-standing mystery surrounding Jeremy's tragic fate. The police found a match. They finally found the perpetrator. The perpetrator's name is Fred Marion Kane III. 69-year-old Kane was arrested at his home in Central Point, Oregon. District Attorney Krishna Abrams said, I am so thankful to have such dedicated cold case investigators that no matter how much time goes by, they remain steadfast in their commitment to solving these horrific cases. Media reports from 1984 show Kane, then 30, was suspected of assaulting a 17-year-old in San Bernardino County. Kane and his roommate were arrested on suspicion of assaulting the teen at knife point. Kane was charged with forcible assault and use of a weapon with enhancements for 4 previous prison terms, but was found not guilty by a jury later that year. The Solano County District Attorney's Office said it is not releasing further information due to the ongoing nature of the investigation, but Kane's arrest has likely drawn the attention of police and Martinez. Since the beginning, Jeremy's case was often mentioned in the same breath as that of Eric Coy. In late January 1987, just a month before Jeremy's disappearance, 9-year-old Eric went for a bike ride between his Martinez home and that of a relative's. Eric knew the route well and rode it often. He left home around 11 a.m. with the expectation he would call, as he always did, once he reached his relative's home a few blocks away. When he did not call home, a search was undertaken. His body was found close to Martinez Junior High School. He had been stabbed nearly a dozen times and succumbed to his injuries. To this day, Eric's case remains unsolved. Anyone with information regarding the case is asked to call the District Attorney's Cold Case Unit at 707-784-8477. Kane made his first appearance in court in Solano County on September 28, 2023. The family of Jeremy Stoner was in the courtroom as Kane was brought in. Jeremy's mother, Karen Tabler, said, "I do not know if it is relief. Not feeling good, that is for sure." She added that it was hard to be in the same room as Kane. Paul Sakira, the Chief Deputy District Attorney for Solano County, said, "Well, I do not think you ever get closure. I've been here for a while. Although I've never witnessed families find real closure, I think that someone being held accountable will bring some solace." Moving on to the next case. Dardeen family murder. 3 members of the Dardeen family were brutally killed in their Ena, Illinois, home on November 18, 1987. Keith Dardeen, their father, husband, and leader of the household, was missing and thought to have murdered his family. But the next day, Keith would also be discovered dead. The case would go unresolved even after a serial killer confessed to the murders 10 years later. The year was 1986. Ena was a small rural town of about 490 occupants. The town had a store, bank, gas station, firehouse, and a post office, but nothing else. In 1986, Russell Keith Dardeen, who preferred to go by his middle name, completed his training for his job as a treatment plant operator. Keith was a native of Mount Carmel, and after completing his training, he bought a trailer and moved to Ena to be closer to his job. His wife, Ruby Elaine Dardeen, who was from Albion, would move to Ena with the couple's 2-year-old son, Peter, shortly after. They rented a land close to Keith's job at a water treatment facility in the woodlands beside Route 37 from a nearby farming couple. Keith's wife, Ruby Elaine Dardeen, who too preferred to go by her middle name, worked at an office supply store in Mount Vernon. Keith and Elaine were avid churchgoers, and when they were not working, they played in a musical ensemble in a local Baptist church. Keith was the lead singer while Elaine played the piano. In 1987, Elaine became pregnant with her second child. They were going to name their new child either Ian or Casey, depending upon the gender of the child. As they were welcoming their new child, Keith put up his trailer for sale and decided on moving from the area to a safer place. The area they had been living in had been becoming increasingly violent, and the family did not feel safe living in the area. There had been 15 homicides in Jefferson County during the span of just 2 years. With the increase in violence, Keith became so protective of his family that on one occasion, he refused entry to his home to a young woman who had asked to use their phone. Keith's mother said that Keith wanted to move back to Mount Carmel even if he were unable to find a job, and that he regretted ever moving to Ina. On November 18, 1987, Keith did not show up for work and did not inform anyone that he was not coming to work that day. He was an extremely reliable worker, and his supervisor thought this was out of character for him. He became concerned when calls to his house went unanswered. He then called Keith's parents, who said they hadn't seen him either. Keith's parents became worried when they called and no one answered the phone. Keith's father, Don Dardine, called the sheriff's office and agreed to drive down to Ina with the spare house key and meet deputies at Keith's house. After reaching the trailer, they knocked on the door, and when no one answered, they used the spare key to enter the trailer. Once inside, they were met with a crime scene so violent and gruesome that it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside, in the same bed, were the bodies of Elaine, her 3-year-old son, Peter, and a newly born baby girl. Both Peter and Elaine had been bound and gagged with a duct tape and beaten to death with a baseball bat found at the crime scene. The baseball bat had been a birthday present to Peter from Keith earlier that year. Elaine had been beaten so grievously that she had gone into labor and given birth to the girl 2 months before her due date. The killer, or killers, took no mercy and beaten the newborn to death as well. Elaine had suffered a blow on the right top of her head that had fractured her skull, and Peter has suffered numerous abrasions and contusions, and his skull was also fractured. At first, Keith was suspected of the crime as he was nowhere to be found. Keith's car, a red 1981 Plymouth, was missing, and police believed Keith murdered his family in a fit of rage and was on the run. However, friends and family did not believe Keith would harm his family. A team was quickly assigned to search for him, but the search quickly ended when a group of hunters found his body in a wheat field approximately a mile away. Keith had been shot 3 times, once in the front skull, once in the right side of the face, and one on the left cheek. His penis was also cut off. His car was parked outside the police station in the town of Benton, 11 miles from his home. His blood was found splattered in the car, and police concluded that he was likely murdered in his car. An autopsy concluded he was likely killed within 1 or 2 hours from the rest of the family. News of the killings caused an unrest among the people living in the area. Many residents bought guns and carried them everywhere to protect themselves. Before the murders, locals used to leave their doors unlocked, but now they checked twice to make sure they were locked. A coroner in a nearby Franklin County said that the locals were so scared to let strangers into their homes that if someone was to run out of gas on a country road, instead of knocking on the doors, they would have a better luck walking the highway or hitching a ride. A total of 30 detectives were assigned to the case, working day-night. More than 100 people were interviewed, but the police were stumped to find a motivation for the killings. No one had anything bad to say about the family. The trailer home was in order with no sign of forced entry. The back door of the trailer had been left open. A VCR, a portable camera, cash, and jewelry were lying in plain sight, but none of it was stolen. The killer or killers had also made an attempt to clean up the crime scene, suggesting they were not in a hurry to leave. Elaine had not been sexually assaulted, and police found no evidence to suggest that Elaine or Keith had any extramarital affairs that could have led to the murders. Police did find small amounts of marijuana in the trailer, but it wasn't enough to suggest that they were involved in drug dealings. In fact, police started to believe that marijuana may have belonged to the killers. The family wasn't known to be in debts or known anyone who held grudges against them. A stack of papers with sports scores were found in the house, and police wondered if Keith had been in gambling debts. However, it was quickly ruled out. The murders were so brutal that the locals started to believe that Satanist cults were responsible. But a police expert ruled them out, as cults often mutilated bodies extensively and leave symbols and lit candles at the crime scene. Police did not believe they were randomly chosen, but that it was very personal. Keith's mother, Joanne, said, "I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs, and he refused. There's also a possibility that someone liked Elaine and she would not accept his advances, and he took out his rage on both of them. We just don't know." With little leads to follow, the case started to go cold. Joanne worked hard to keep the public interest in the case. She would call the detectives throughout 1990s offering possible leads she had gathered or asking for any information on the case. She was able to collect more than 3,000 signatures from residents asking the Oprah Winfrey Show to air the case. But the producers of the show turned her down, stating that the crime was too brutal to be featured on daytime television. America's Most Wanted also turned down airing the show at first, but eventually ran a segment in 1998. However, the feature failed to generate any leads. In 1999, Tommy Lynn Sells was arrested for cutting the throats of 2 girls near Del Rio, Texas. One of the girls survived and was able to identify Sells as the killer. He was convicted and sentenced to death for that murder, and another one he committed earlier in 1999. While in prison, he started confessing to a number of other murders that he claimed to have committed while hitchhiking and hopping trains to get around the country. Among these murders, he claimed to have murdered the Dardine family. In 2010, Sells claimed that in November of 1987, while traveling through Jefferson County, he met Keith at a truck stop, or maybe a pool hall, and Keith invited him to his home for dinner. After the meal, Sells said Keith suggested to engage in a threesome with him and Elaine. He claimed that this alleged sexual offer had set him off, and in an uncontrollable rage, he murdered the whole family. However, friends and family and the police do not believe this, given how protective Keith was of his family to even consider letting strangers into his home. Sells was interviewed numerous times, and during these questionings, his story changed several times. Sells gave details that were consistent with the general facts that were already reported publicly. When questioned about the information that was kept secret from the public, he was less trustworthy. In 2000, when Sells first confessed, Joanne thought he was the murderer. But as the years passed, she became increasingly certain that he was not at fault. Police were only able to connect Sells to 22 murders, none of which involved the Dardine family, despite his confession to more than 70 homicides. 2014 saw his execution. Moving on to the next case. Charlie Ross. In 1874, America's first kidnapping victim for ransom was Charles Brewster Ross, or Charlie as he was commonly known. Even though Charlie Ross's case is almost a century and a half old, it has not been resolved, and his fate is still unknown. Christian K. Ross and his wife Sarah Ann welcomed Charlie into the world on May 4, 1870, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. The couple resided in a big estate in Germantown, a wealthy neighborhood of Philadelphia, and were for a while comparatively well off. On July 1, 1874, Charlie and his 6-year-old brother Walter were playing in the family's front garden. Sarah Ann was away in Atlantic City recovering from an illness while Christian spent most of the day working at his store. The children were watched over by the home's servants. When Christian returned home from work, he was not immediately alarmed to find that Walter and Charlie were not in the front garden, as one of the maids claimed they had seen the boys playing out on the street with friends. However, Christian was soon alerted by a neighbor who'd witnessed the boys being taken away in a horse-drawn carriage. It was later uncovered that over a period of several days, 2 men had supplied the children with sweets. And on July 1st, they'd approached and offered Charlie and Walter not only sweets, but fireworks too. They promised the children they'd get both of these things if they agreed to ride with the strangers. The boys agreed, but shortly after pulling away from their home, 4-year-old Charlie began to cry. Walter was dropped off at a local store and given money to buy fireworks. But when he returns, the kidnappers and his brother were gone. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Walter was soon reunited with his family by a local citizen, but Charlie remained missing. On July 3rd, Christian placed an ad in the local paper offering $300 for his son's safe return. Soon after this, he began to receive ransom letters from the apparent kidnappers. The letters came in the form of notes mailed from post offices in Philadelphia and beyond, and they were written poorly. The handwriting was described as odd, while the writing itself barely literate with extremely poor spelling and grammar. The ransom letters demanded $20,000 for the safe return of Charlie, which is the equivalent of around $450,000 today. The kidnappers cautioned the family against contacting law enforcement and threatened to hurt Charlie if Christian did not cooperate. However, by this point in time, the Ross family had lost a considerable amount of their wealth. Although they continued to live in a large house in an affluent area, Christian's store was beginning to buckle due to the stock market crash of '73, and the family was heavily in debt. As a result, they simply could not afford the ransom demands. The family saw no way out, and so they contacted their local police departments. Several prominent Philadelphians enlisted the help of the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency, the same agency which we've covered on a previous episode of Cold Case Detective discussing Dorothy Arnold. The agency printed thousands of flyers and posters featuring Charlie's likeness. And while the police officers conducted one of the 19th century's biggest manhunts, they could not locate the missing 4-year-old. While several attempts were made to deliver the ransom money to the kidnappers, each time the perpetrators failed to appear. After 23 notes, Charlie's abductors ceased communicating with his family. The case took a twist 5 months later when on the night of December 13, the house of a judge living in Brooklyn was burgled. The judge's brother, who lived next door, gathered members of his household, and they each armed themselves with weapons and set out to catch the intruders. The men gunned down both burglars, career criminals named Bill Mosher and Joe Douglas, who were recently released from jail. While Mosher was killed instantly, Douglas lived 2 more hours and was able to briefly communicate with the men who had shot him. It seems to be rather unclear exactly what Joe Douglas said that night, but the general consensus appears to be that he admitted that he and Moshe had abducted Charlie Ross. But he also said that his now dead partner knew the current location of the 4-year-old. After this, however, his statements became unclear again. There is some confusion over whether he admitted that Charlie was dead or whether he stated that the boy would be returned to his family in a few days. It seemed to be agreed upon that Douglas would have no reason to lie because he knew he was dying when he confessed. If Charlie was still alive at the time the 2 men passed away, he was never returned to his family. Soon after this, Walter Ross was taken to New York to see if he could identify Moshe and Douglas as the men who'd taken Charlie that day in July. Walter immediately recognized them, especially Moshe, who had a distinctly malformed nose, as the cartilage had been destroyed by cancer. It was soon discovered that a disgraced policeman named William Westervelt was an associate of Bill Mosher and also his brother-in-law. Westervelt was arrested and held in connection with the case, and in 1875 he was tried for Charlie's kidnapping. While awaiting trial, Westervelt apparently told Christian that Charlie was alive at the time of Mosher's death. However, the former police officer could not be tied to the crime, and Walter insisted that he was not one of the kidnappers. Subsequently, Westervelt was found not guilty of kidnapping, but was convicted of a lesser conspiracy charge and ultimately served 6 years in prison, though he continued to maintain his innocence throughout his sentence. In the first year alone, following Charlie's kidnapping, 600 sightings flooded in from all across the country, but sadly, none of them panned out. 2 years after he went missing, Christian's father wrote a book about the case and had it published. He used the money he made from his best-selling novel to continue his search for his son's whereabouts. By 1878, the media frenzy surrounding the case began to piece around. To renew interest, Christian had the book reprinted and began giving lectures in Boston. Both he and Charlie's mother, Sarah Ann, continued to search for their son until the day they passed away. Christian in 1897 and Sarah Ann in 1912. The couple followed copious amounts of leads, interviewed over 570 people, and spent approximately $60,000 searching for Charlie, hoping that one day they could bring him home. In 1924, To coincide with the 50th anniversary of when Charlie vanished, the local papers began reporting on the case again. By that time, Walter Ross was an adult and working as a stockbroker. He reported that he and his siblings continued to receive letters from men claiming to be their missing brother. And during their lifetime, it was found that the siblings investigated around 1,000 impersonators. The most notable of these came from a man named Gustav Blair, who was a 69-year-old carpenter living in Phoenix, Arizona in 1934, when he came forward. He petitioned for the courts to recognize him as the real Charlie Ross, claiming that he'd been abducted as a child and lived in a cave for a time before being adopted by a man who later told him in 198 that he was the missing 4-year-old from Philadelphia and that he had kept him for the kidnappers. The Ross siblings were not happy about this, with Walter exhausted from the years of con men attempting to get a slice of the family inheritance, labeling Blair a crank and saying that he found Blair's story to be unconvincing. He added later that he believed the idea of Charlie still being alive was absurd, stating, "We've long ago given up hope that Charlie would ever be found alive." Despite their unhappiness, the Ross family did not spend time contesting Blair's claims, and so the court ruled that he was Charles Brewster Ross. Even with this, Blair was never acknowledged by the family as their missing brother, and they did not leave him any money or property from their parents' estates. For a short while, Blair moved to LA and attempted to sell his life story to a movie studio, but this endeavor failed. He eventually moved to Germantown, then back to Phoenix with his wife. Blair died in December of 1943, age 73, still claiming to be Charlie Ross. However, his descendants later took a DNA test which conclusively proved he was not the missing child, but really a man named Nelson Miller. The fates of Westervelt, Mosher, and Douglas served as a deterrent to anyone who wished to kidnap for ransom. The next high-profile ransom case did not occur until 1900, when 16-year-old Edward Coude Jr. was abducted while running errands. The case of Charlie Ross was what prompted the famous "don't take candy from strangers" notion, and the missing persons database. The Charlie Project was named after him. Not only this, but as a result of the case, Pennsylvania later became the first state to pass a law changing kidnapping from a misdemeanor to a felony. The Ross family home was torn down in 1926, and Walter passed away in 1943. With him died perhaps the final chance of ever recovering Charlie. It's an odd case because Charlie's location has never been found, but the name of the kidnappers is known, and officials and his family are still unsure of his fate nearly a century and a half later. Moving on to the next case. The Doodler. There was a man sitting in the dark with a pencil, either hidden amid the flamboyantly and elegantly dressed people of Polk Street's lively nightlife, or under the watchful gaze of the fluorescent lights of the bars of the Castro and Tenderloin district. He would be modest and humble in his approach, according to survivors. According to the account, he would sit by himself, probably holding a pen in one hand and a drink in the other, and show guys sketches that he had previously made. One witness remembers seeing sketches of animals in a sketchbook. According to sealed police files, some of the attacks might have started with a drawing on a cocktail napkin. The subject of the makeshift artwork was the unintentional victim of a serial murderer who was furious, as shown by the horrific trail of victims he left behind. The Doodler is a nickname which seems almost light-hearted upon first glance, but to those who lived during his reign of terror, the name represents a very dark period in San Francisco's history, one of fear and uncertainty. He is San Francisco's other serial killer, still at large. Overshadowed by the Zodiac and the Zebra killings, the Doodler quietly preyed on those most vulnerable to violence at the time, the LGBTQ population. To date, 5 men between the ages of 20 and 766 have been ruled as victims of this artistically inclined assassin. But while the Doodler has only been publicly linked to cases in San Francisco, there is a chance that he may have continued to kill in other locations throughout the U.S. as well. The Doodler is known to frequent bars located in Macastro, Tenderloin, and Polk Street. Those areas were the main hangouts for people who wished to be free of society's scrutinizing eye. Only in those neighborhoods was it safe for two people of the same gender to walk hand in hand, as engaging in such brazen acts of homosexuality, while in the more mainstream neighborhoods could result in arrests for some and grievous bodily harm for others. The downtown neighborhood of the Tenderloin, in a similar fashion to how it is today, was home to a swath of affordable housing projects. As it was one of the very few places affordable enough for people who were single and estranged from family to live in San Francisco, the neighborhood became what many called the heart of the gay community from the late 60s until the early 70s. Despite the robust gay nightlife, San Francisco was not perfect by any means, as crimes against the LGBTQ population were rampant. When reflecting on San Francisco through the lens of the hippie movement and the Grateful Dead, it is easy to forget that the city was not always the mecca for the LGBTQ community that the media liked to portray it as. In fact, the now very liberal and inclusive city, hailed as the, quote, gay capital of America, according to a 1964 issue of Life magazine, and home to the free love movement, was not actually as free as it was made out to be, especially for those most vulnerable to society's wrath. Because homosexuality was not decriminalized locally until 1 month before the killings ceased. In the 2 years that the Doodler roamed the streets of the city, gay men had not only to fear the crimes that may be committed against them, but also the very people tasked with protecting them: the police. 2 men found kissing or even simply holding hands in public could yield an arrest, which could then lead to the names, addresses, and workplaces of those arrested, alongside their crimes of culture being publicized. Gay men could lose their jobs, their living spaces, their families, and essentially their lives as they knew it if outed by police. Because of this division, those who were on the receiving end of violence, be it at the hands of the Doodler or other miscreants, had to think twice before going to the police for help, as they were liable to be charged themselves simply for being themselves. While it was not uncommon for members of the LGBTQ community to experience a barrage of hate, especially after dark, a serial killer amidst their ranks was a new threat. The passing of the Consenting Adult Sex Bill in the spring of 1975 paved the way to decriminalizing homosexuality for the most part between consenting adults. Yet the divisions and mistrust between the gay community and police still remained, a rocky relationship of which the Doodler took full advantage. The first victim of this artistic yet gruesome serial killer was found on the beach at 48th and Ulloa on January 24, 1974. Locals recall that back then, the dark and quiet sand dunes and cliffs of the area of Ocean Beach was a known location for casual gay hookups after dark. The fog enveloped San Francisco's shoreline like clockwork each morning, and the crime scene would have almost looked peaceful. But upon further inspection, first responders would have been treated to a bloody scene. The victim was Gerald Earl Kavanaugh, a Canadian man who had come to America for work and a better life. 49 years old at the time of his murder, he was known to frequent neighborhoods like the Tenderloin and Polk Street. Stabbed 17 times in the chest, back, and stomach, he was found parallel to the Great Highway. His body was partially submerged in the water. He had a short and stocky build and was balding. He was found with a bloody flashlight next to him. Found on his back face up, Kavanaugh had to be pulled in by first responders so that the ocean could not wash him or any more evidence away into obscurity. A Timex wristwatch and a few dollars were all that the victim had on him besides his bloodied clothes. Autopsy reports show that Kavanaugh was alive and conscious at the time of his stabbing. Evidence for this statement is apparent in the numerous defensive wounds on his hands and arms. He initially remained unidentified, being temporarily known as John Doe 7, as he was the 7th murderer of the year. He was a single man, and therefore detectives had very few details about his personal life from which to develop leads. After the killing, the police asked the media for help, and the San Francisco Chronicle published a piece asking for people to call in with much-needed new information. But the small and short article was buried on page 42, and many may have missed it. Police gave the newspaper a phone number to publish in hopes of acquiring new leads, but no viable witnesses came forward. Kavanaugh is believed to be the doodler's first victim, and while logically all serial killers have to start somewhere, the likelihood that this was the killer's first foray into the world of violence is quite low, and there may be other victims we do not know about. The doodler was not the only serial killer on San Francisco streets during that time period, however. In January, April of 1974, a second wave of random shootings committed by the so-called zebra killers overshadowed the then unrecognized pattern of gay men being violently assaulted and killed. One day in early 1975, 5 people were randomly shot on the streets of San Francisco, and over the next couple of days, people would be randomly shot at left and right. 2 innocent teenagers were gunned down getting a late-night snack. The randomness of the victims terrified both government officials and civilians alike. Parents didn't let their children play on the sidewalk or in parks. No one felt safe, and for a brief moment in time, the streets of San Francisco, normally with jostling crowds full of tourists and locals alike, were ghost towns with only the occasional scurrying citizen making their way from a central place to place while looking over their shoulders constantly. Due to the seriousness of the random killings, the cops would only communicate about the case on the Z or Z channel, thus leading to the killers being dubbed the Zebra Killers. The Zebra Killers had been indiscriminately shooting people walking the city streets in broad daylight, whereas the Doodler, who came out only at night, targeted a specific marginalized minority population, which had already been vilified by police and society as a whole. So it wasn't surprising that one case got more attention than the other from both investigators and the media alike. On top of it all, the infamous Zodiac Killer had been terrorizing the Bay Area and using up valuable police resources since 1968. So it was not only the zebra killings but also the Zodiac killings that further overshadowed a murderer who only targeted the gay population. On January 24th, the Doodler's first victim was found. On January 29th, the zebra killings restarted, and on January 30th and 31st, the Zodiac Killer re-emerged, mailing his first letter in 3 years, mocking police and threatening the public yet again. Perhaps he felt left out. Needless to say, the last few days of the first month of 1974 was turning out to be a somewhat busy week for the 16-man homicide squad of San Francisco, as well as for the media. 5 months later, nearly to the day, a second victim was found on 34th and Fulton by the lake on a path under a big tree. Jay Stevens was discovered on June 25, 1974, by a woman walking along Spreckles Lake in San Francisco. He was found with blood in his mouth and empty pockets. At 6'2", his physique was not only formidable, but he was also street smart. He kept his wits about him by abstaining from alcohol. He was found with 5 stab wounds. The victim was a well-known and deeply cherished local drag performer who went by the stage name Jay. Stevens was a Bay Area native who lived in the East Bay in Concord. Jay's drag queen performances were accompanied by comedy that those who were blessed enough to see him perform recall as being witty and avant-garde. Friends recall he would lip-sync Julie Andrews. He was the star of the bar scene and even had his own show at the PS Lounge called The Jay Stevens Show. He was well known all about town in some of the main gay hangouts such as the Cockpit, Bojangles, and the Gilded Cage. We know most about Stevens' life due to his local pseudo-celebrity status. A star drag queen, his sister recalls that even as a 6-year-old, Stevens would dress as a girl and would go by the name of Caroline. She remembers that when a draft letter came in the 1960s that he finally came out to the military recruiter, and he was of course denied a spot. This brought much shame to his family from their perspective. In 1973, Stevens received an award for his drag work at the Kabuki Theater in San Francisco, and his father, in what was for him a progressive act of acceptance and understanding, attended the award ceremony and bought his son, who was dressed as a woman, a corsage to honor his work and pronounce the acceptance of his true self. In some ways, this was the best last interaction they could have had. Stevens was only 27 years old when he was killed, and the medical examiner later determined that he had died only a few hours prior to his body being found. Witnesses state they saw him at a club the previous day. Based on defensive wounds, the medical detectives wondered, due to the remoteness of the area in relation to the clubs or restaurants, if possibly the killer lured and actually transported his victims himself in order to further isolate them. The third victim, Klaus Christmann, was discovered by a woman walking her dog on July 7, 1974. The woman, all these years later, remembers the moment she found the body vividly. The person who first found and notified the police of the existence of a body on the beach was Taube Wies, who is now 95. She recalls stumbling upon the corpse of a German man at 6 a.m. while walking her German Shepherd, Moondance. Klaus was found at the base of Vicente Avenue on the beach. His death was visually even more brutal, if that was possible, than that of the previous victim's injuries, as he had considerably more stab wounds than Stevens and had been slashed in the throat several times. While the other victims had been single, Klaus was in a heterosexual marriage with 2 children. Originally from Germany, Klaus had come to America to, quote, achieve something better for himself and his family, as Klaus's daughter phrases it. She went on to say that, quote, many people thought that in America pretty much anything is possible, and you can achieve much more. The 31-year-old had been the owner of a bar which catered to both gay and straight customers alike, and while not publicly out, his daughter recalls believing that there was something he was hiding about his sexuality. In April of 1974, Klaus flew out to visit an American friend that he had met while the American was stationed overseas. From April of 1974 up until his death, Klaus enjoyed the bar scene immensely and was last seen on Saturday night partying at Bojangles, an open and inclusive dance club in the Tenderloin. The Tenderloin was a heavily policed area, but that doesn't mean it was safe. This would be the last time he was seen alive by any known witnesses. Fully clothed, carrying makeup, police report that the deceased's pants were unzipped and open. The stab wounds indicated that the killer used such force and rage in the neck area that the body was nearly decapitated. On May 12, 1975, the fourth victim was found on the Pacific Coast Highway, 1 block from where Kavanaugh's body was found. He was found by a local named Christopher Griffin, a 22-year-old who was out on a walk when he noticed a body near the sand dunes. At first, he thought the form was of a sunbather, as it was a beautiful morning, but upon further inspection, the blood was evident. The victim was found stabbed 16 times. This victim was able to be identified quickly as Frederick Kappen, a nurse who had worked locally and was a decorated war veteran. Kappen's death may have started with the killer urging him to use the nearby sand dunes as a sort of private environment for a late-night soiree. The coroner notes, quote, there was dried blood smeared on the soles of both shoes, on the hands, about the face and upper torso, anterior, lateral, and posterior. Kappen was wearing a corduroy jacket and a striped Picasso shirt when he died. While living, Kappen was a hero, credited officially with saving the lives of 4 Marines in Vietnam. He fought off the enemy and pulled 4 men to safety. He later became a nurse in San Francisco. When his family asked to visit him in the city in 1973, Kappen said no to them because he felt like it was too dangerous due to the Zodiac killings happening as well as the general crime of the city in the 70s. Kappen was an artist himself. His family recalls that he actually had artwork on display at a bar in Seattle. His sister recalls feeling unsettled upon learning about the artistry connection. She wonders if Kappen was perhaps targeted for his passion for art. The next victim, the Doodler's 5th officially, was Harold Goldberg, who was found at the 16th hole of the Lincoln Park Golf Course, a public course by Ocean Beach. He was found in the bushes with the coroner telling a reporter from the Chronicle that his body was hidden in an igloo like cove of brush near the 16th hole of the golf course. Based on the state of decomposition, police believed Goldberg had been dead for around 2 weeks before being found. A Swedish-American immigrant, Goldberg was born on September 11th. 190,008, and had been naturalized to America 20 years before his death. He was the eldest of the known Doodler victims at the age of 66. He had no children nor family, so for some time he remained unidentified. He was found at 9:30 the Sunday morning, just 10 feet off a service road by a hiker. The victim seems to have been attacked with what they thought was a rock and tree branch. These details are consistent with a rage killing like the others, but Goldberg was notably not stabbed. Detectives on the case theorized that due to the incline of the area, the killer could have dropped the knife and had to improvise. The coroner wrote that, quote, "Deceased had no underpants and his blue pants were unzipped." There was also a handkerchief found at the scene that police speculated could have been dropped by the killer. Now the count was 5 men. All had been found dead within 4 miles of each other, all within the last 18 months. The killings would stop in June of 75, but the attacks would not. In July of 1975, police got what was their biggest break yet in the form of 3 failed Doodler killings. The first person the Doodler failed with after successfully killing 5 men was a man known by the media as only the Diplomat. While police are aware and have spoken with this surviving victim, his identity is unknown to the public. He is believed to be from a country in Northern Europe and is, according to police, still residing in the Bay Area and living as a gay man. While reporters have made attempts to track down the surviving witness, narrowing down the country of origin is difficult, as consulates in San Francisco were numerous back then as they are today. Rumors around the SFPD were that it may have been a Swedish diplomat known to frequent the Nubel, an inclusive piano bar. While the diplomat currently refuses to cooperate anymore in the investigation, his original statement held many important pieces of information. According to the police, the diplomat recalls that he first encountered the Doodler at 2 a.m. in July of 1975. He recalls that the gay bar, the Rear End, had just closed for the night, and its patrons were making their way to the next open and welcoming establishment for a carb-fueled after-party at the popular Market Street diner called the Truck Stop. It was there in the diner that the unnamed diplomat recalls meeting the artist. He remembers the artist reveling in the attention that he was receiving from drawing images of animals on napkins. According to police, the diplomat then invited the artist, who did not give his name nor was he asked for it, to his nearby high-rise residence at Fox Plaza at 1390 Market Street. His exact address was not disclosed for privacy reasons, but the police state that upon hearing the exact location, the doodler said, "You must have a pretty good view there." The diplomat recalls that the artist then went to the restroom, locked the door, and did not come out for a bit. Miffed but intrigued, the diplomat was not on guard and had his back turned when the doodler finally came out. He was then stabbed repeatedly with a steak knife. As he was being stabbed in the back, the killer was making attempts to turn him around to stab his chest area as well. The diplomat recalls the killer saying, quote, "You guys are all alike." In what was a stroke of luck for the victim, and perhaps bad planning on the part of the killer, the steak knife broke. No information on the origin of the steak knife is given in the media, as this is still an open case and some facts need to be withheld to preserve the integrity of the case in hopes of a conviction. But it could be reasoned that the killer found an impromptu weapon either at the diner or at the victim's home, and that is why the attack ultimately failed. It is unknown the exact weapon used in past cases, but the injuries of the doodler's past victims indicate that something much sharper and more durable would have been needed to make such fatal and numerous injuries. In what some would say was a very foolish decision, less than 2 weeks after the attack on the diplomat, the doodler returned to Fox Plaza, going up to the very same floor the diplomat lived on. In what may have been a case of mistaken identity or some sort of misappropriated need to finish the job no matter who the man was, the killer talked his way into an apartment just a few doors down from the diplomat. He got inside under the guise of needing to use the phone and was able to bind the man's hands and feet before the man screaming and pounding on the wall attracted the attention of neighbors, who thankfully alerted the building's security. But the doodler was able to slip out, unnoticed in the ensuing commotion. The second failed victim. who has since passed, according to Kevin Fagan, an investigative journalist who has published several pieces on the case and to whom the resurgence of media attention to the case can be attributed, also stated that the killer kept repeating the phrase, quote, "You guys are all alike." Unsatisfied and undeterred, the killer tried unsuccessfully for a third time, this time targeting not a diplomat but an actor that police state was well known enough in America to be fearful of being outed. The actor stated that after inviting the artist back to his residence and into his bed, the killer slipped up and allowed a concealed knife to fall from his long-sleeved jacket. Some wonder, especially due to obscure statements made about the unnamed actor, if he may have been Rock Hudson or Cary Grant. Both were said to frequent San Francisco's gay bars in the 70s, and both were outed in the latter years of their life. They both passed in the 80s, and their families have no comment. Fagan, a reporter for the SF Chronicle, does not disclose the identity of any of the victims due to their right to privacy. In all three aforementioned cases, the surviving victims did eventually file police reports, but they refused to testify in court due to the societal implications of their sexual orientation being revealed. While all three were not comfortable testifying, they all had interacted closely with the doodler and could provide police a thorough physical description, something investigators desperately needed in order to drum up new leads. The diplomat had the best recollection of his attacker. He stated that the killer was African American, young, perhaps between the ages of 19 and 23, tall and lanky. He was described as having a narrow face with high-set cheekbones. The eyes were described as wide-set, and the diplomat reportedly said that they had a calm look to them. It should be noted that psychopaths are often observed as having an eerily calm affect, and their eyes can be described as dead or devoid of emotion, which some may perceive as calmness. With the diplomat's physical description in hand, in October of 1975, a sketch was made of the killer with the statement "serial killer" on the loose written underneath. It was shared with the public via the Centennial, a queer newspaper at the time which had been dutifully covering what mainstream media had neglected to report. More than a week later, the San Francisco Chronicle chose to publish it as well. By now, there had been 5 murders and 3 attempted murders related to the artist that police knew of, and time was of the essence to stop another attack. If the public knew anything, they needed to share it with police. And then, a potential break. That month, the secretary of a psychiatrist from Highland Hospital called police claiming her boss was actually seeing the doodler as a patient. But as the public was in a frenzy as the sketch of the suspect had just been released, her tip was buried under numerous others. When patient was still free 10 days later, the secretary at Highland Hospital called police again, agitated at the inaction, and this time providing a license plate number for further identification purposes. 3 days later, the actual psychiatrist came forward and informed the police that, yes, one of his patients had confessed during a session that he was in fact the doodler, and that he had committed the murders on Ocean Beach due to his hatred of being gay. The psychiatrist said that, in addition to the confession, his patient looked an awful lot like the sketch artist image that was circulating. The therapist stated that in addition to the murder confession, the patient had also admitted that he was having difficulty with his sexuality, but that talking to the psychiatrist helped. This fit with the self-hating theory, as many who have studied the case postulate that the killer was likely a gay man himself and harbored feelings of self-hatred and rage due to a lack of personal and societal acceptance. While the patient was most likely under the impression that confidentiality laws bound their conversations to secrecy, mandated reporting laws were updated in 1975 to include therapists, and the imminent threat that his patient faced to the public allowed the medical professional to discuss his session notes with police. With the name in hand, the police followed up with the patient, and while he told them he did used to struggle with his sexuality, he said that he had a girlfriend now and was doing well. With no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, as DNA technology was not sufficient enough to tie him to the crime scene or the bodies, the police could only watch him from afar, which they did dedicating many man-hours to suspect surveillance. And while the police couldn't declare victory without a suspect in jail, the public began to breathe easier when, after that initial interview, the attacks stopped, at least locally. After the suspect was interviewed, and of course denied involvement, he took a strange roundabout trip through the United States. He went from the Bay Area to the South, then up the East Coast, and then to the Midwest. A trip with unknown purposes, although detectives allude to similar cases happening in subsequent areas, but have refused to give further information due to the cases still being open. Police point to some suspiciously similar cases in Louisiana, however, but decline to give further details. Many coincidences tie this unknown patient to the murders, but not enough to convict. It was not until January of 1976 that this gruesome serial killer was finally referred to officially as the Doodler by mainstream media, so chosen, of course, due to his habit of luring victims with his impromptu art. In the wake of 5 unsolved and brutal stabbings and at least 3 attacks, the SF Chronicle made the Doodler front page news. However, the delay, clearly political in nature due to the legality and perception of homosexuality prior to 1976, clearly impacted the direction of the case, with fresh witnesses and leads all but dried up in the ensuing years. Some wonder why the 3 survivors were so intent on keeping quiet. Did the killer somehow threaten their careers? Was their fear of being outed stronger than their thirst for justice or their desire to rid the streets of a serial killer? The justification behind such silence is unknown. While it has been over 40 years since the attacks and the age of the remaining victims would probably indicate they might be off of social media, their respective job titles at the time of the attack would indicate that they may still be in the public eye and may be willing to come forward now, knowing that the stigma surrounding same-sex interactions has been somewhat lessened, and that any outcries would be treated in the strictest of confidences, and any new information gleaned from these interviews would be private according to police procedure. In hopes of drumming up new leads, police released an age progression depicting what the Doodler may look like in 2018 at the estimated age of 63-69. In 2018, they also talked to the patient himself, who reiterated his innocence but also unknowingly allowed detectives to get a DNA sample from him, which could be used against him in the future. 2019 brought a new life to the cold case. After police released an updated sketch, the lead inspector, Inspector Cunningham of the SFPD, officially reopened the case, asking the public for tips and offering new rewards. Inspector Cunningham tried to find out who the psychiatrist turned tipster was, but the psychiatrist's name was not recorded in the surviving 50-year-old paper police files, and the only mention of his name is written as Doctor. Priest Psych equals C. Highland Hospital. This had the doctor's name spelled like one would spell that of a Catholic priest, but a podcast by Kevin Bacon in the San Francisco Chronicle published in April of 2021 claims that they might have actually found the psychiatrist who canceled the alleged Doodler. His name sounds like priest, but is actually spelled Preece, P-R-E-E-C-E, doctor. Howard Preece was a psychiatrist who lived and practiced in the Bay Area in the 1970s. It is believed his name was misspelled in the records. It was confirmed that Preece was working at Highland Hospital around the time of the killings. He had spent years counseling U.S. Army troops in Germany and had also counseled inmates at Salinas Valley State Prison. Dr. Preece, however, died in 2005, so there is no way to confirm if he was the psychiatrist or not, and currently Kevin Fagan, the creator of the podcast, is looking for any relatives who may recall more information. The police revealed that the suspect identified simply as the patient in 1970s was most likely believed to be the Doodler, but he could never be charged. The police updated the sketch of the killer and offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. They also released the original recording of the 911 call placed by the unknown male when the first victim was found. However, 45 years have elapsed since then, and many believe that most of the surviving victims and witnesses are either dead, untraceable, or do not want to be found. In 2020, the police submitted DNA taken from the bloody clothes of the victims recovered from the crime scenes, but so far there has been no match. It is difficult to separate two unique patterns of DNA, especially from so old a case. The blood on the clothes was primarily the victim, but the suspect may have cut himself in the process. Based on police reports containing similar victim profiles and modus operandi, there may be a total of 16 brutal murders attributed to the doodler, as well as countless attacks. Investigators believe he is still at large today, with certain evidence that he is currently living as an openly gay guy in the San Francisco East Bay, aged and not yet held accountable. Murder has no statute of limitations, and the case is still open. Investigators involved in the case emphasize that the killer will remain free to strike again unless someone comes forward with fresh information, or until DNA technology advances enough to compare the collected DNA with artifacts from previous crime scenes, most notably a handkerchief they believe may have been used by the perpetrators. Daniel Cunningham, a homicide cold case investigator, can be reached at 415-553-9515 by anyone with information on this crime or potential leads. You can text a tip to 847-411 or phone the SFPD tip line at 415-575-4444 if you would like to stay anonymous. Moving on to the next case. Connie Margotto. On July 31, 1976, Connie Margotto was born in Rockville, Connecticut, to Cindy and Kenneth. With a brother named Keith and two sisters, Marlise and Leslie, Connie was one of 4 siblings. The Margottas were raised in Ellington and Vernon. Connie completed her education at Ellington High School in 1995. Connie then enrolled at the University of Connecticut. She attained her undergraduate degree in 1999 and began working as a pharmaceutical sales representative for Reckitt Benckiser. Everyone who knew Connie described her as a warm-hearted, generous person who would do anything for those she loved. Connie had many friends and was popular among everyone she met. In the early 2000s, Connie told her close friends about a man she had met. His name was Richard DeBate, and Connie was smitten. He was a handsome man who treated Connie like a queen. When Connie was introduced to Richard's family, they immediately knew that she was the one for him. Richard, or Rick as he was known, was born on July 29, 1976 to parents Richard Sr. and Julie DeBate. He grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, and graduated from Manchester High School in 1995. After finishing high school, Rick attended technical school before beginning his career in computer network administration. Ricky and Connie married on July 4, 2003, and had 2 sons, RJ and Connor. Connie was a devoted mother to her boys, and Rick seemed like the perfect husband and family man. The DeBates lived in a beautiful home in Ellington on Birchview Drive. 2 of Connie's closest friends, Peggy and Darlene, lived in the same neighborhood. Their families spent plenty of time together, with Peggy and Darlene often joking about what a doting husband Rick was to Connie. From any outside perspective, life for the DeBates looked picture perfect. They seemed to have it all. In reality, cracks had started to show. December 23, 2015 started like any other day. It was a Wednesday, and everyone in Ellington felt the festive cheer with Christmas just 2 days away. At 8:10 a.m., Rick dropped Connor and RJ off at the nearby bus stop. While he was out, Connie dressed and headed to a spin class at the local YMCA. What happened next is unclear, as Rick has given many differing versions of events. This is what he first told investigators after the incident. Rick dropped off the boys and then returned home to change into his work clothes. Once he was ready, Rick got back into his car at 8:30 a.m. and set off on the 40-minute drive to work. He wasn't on the road for long until he realized his laptop was still at home. Rick couldn't work without it, so he went onto his cell phone and emailed his supervisor that he would be late. As Rick looked at his phone, he happened to see a security alert about a silent alarm that had been triggered at his home. He mentioned this in the email as well. Rick headed back home and cautiously went inside. Rick heard a noise coming from upstairs, and upon further investigation, it sounded like someone was in their main bedroom. The door was partially opened, and when Rick looked inside, he was confronted by a masked intruder. It was a large framed man standing roughly 6 foot 2 inches tall, wearing a dark green camouflage outfit and mask. The intruder pulled out a knife and told Rick something along the lines of, "Give me your money, your wallet, and your pins. And if you don't, I'm going to wait here for your wife and kids." The man had a deep voice, which Rick compared to sounding like Vin Diesel. Rick had been with the intruder for less than a minute when he heard the sound of their garage door opening. It was Connie. Her class had been canceled and she was back early. Rick screamed out to her desperately, trying to alert his wife to the danger in their house. The intruder then apparently turned his attention to Connie, and he and Rick were in a race to reach her first. In the struggle, Rick was pushed down the stairs and was briefly disoriented. The intruder managed to get past him and pursue Connie into the basement. Rick was able to pick himself up off the floor and rush to Connie's rescue, but it was too late. As he sped down the stairs, a gunshot rang out. It was so loud that his hearing was affected for several minutes afterward. The intruder turned his focus back on Rick, where he overpowered him by using a certain pressure point that caused him to collapse. The next thing Rick knew, he had been partially tied to a metal folding chair with zip ties. The intruder had grabbed a box cutter from Rick's toolbox and inflicted superficial wounds on Rick's body with it. The intruder next grabbed a blowtorch, which he used to burn random items. He then tried to use the blowtorch on Rick, but Rick was able to use his free hand and grab the blowtorch from the intruder. He aimed it at the man's face and burnt him, despite Rick previously saying the man had a mask on. The entire ordeal lasted 5 minutes before Rick scared the man off after the blowtorch incident. Looking at the original timeline, this meant that it would now be no later than 9:05 a.m. Rick only calls the police at 10:21 a.m. State troopers were already on their way, as a call had been automatically placed to them at 10:16 a.m. from the security company regarding an alarm triggered at home. This alert gets sent to authorities immediately. So why did it not get sent after the alert that Rick allegedly saw shortly past 8:30 a.m.? The first to arrive at 7 Birchview Drive was a member of the Ellington Fire Department. He noticed the front door was open, but the storm door was still closed. He knocked with no answer and proceeded inside. He first noticed a light layer of smoke that hung in the air. The basement door was open, and droplets of blood led from the basement toward the kitchen. The man followed the trail where he found Rick. Rick was still attached to the folding chair, lying face down on the kitchen floor. Rick told the man that he is still in the house, referring to the intruder. The man quickly called for backup, reporting the crime as a home invasion, and soon a flood of officers were on the scene. They focused on locating the gunman as soon as possible. The investigators started taking note of everything in the house. They took multiple images of Rick on the floor, showing how he had been tied to the metal chair. Curiously, it was only Rick's left hand and left ankle that was zip-tied. Connie was found in the basement's boiler room. She had been shot twice, once in the stomach and in the back of the head. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. This was no longer just a home invasion. K-9 units were soon on the scene, hoping they would show investigators which direction the gunman had gone in. But the dogs seemed only to be focused on one person, Rick DeBate. One of the dogs found Rick's wallet on the lawn outside, presumably where the intruder had dropped it while fleeing. Still, the dogs could not follow a scent leading away from the property. Instead, they led their handlers to the ambulance where Rick was being treated for his superficial wounds. From the get-go, investigators saw holes in Rick's story. Rick was taken to Hartford Hospital. This is where he was first questioned about the events that day. He described the intruder to the investigators and told them he had seen the man shoot Connie in the basement. After he said his version of events, the investigators had some follow-up questions for Rick. This was when they noticed Rick's story changing slightly, which is always a red flag. There was confusion about the alarm system when Rick saw the alarm alert, and whether he had been the one who set it off. Initially, Rick said he left before Connie dropped the boys off. This changed to him saying he couldn't remember who left first. The next thing that changed was his explanation of the sound upstairs. Now, Rick hadn't heard a sound when he first entered. Instead, he went upstairs and noticed the bedroom light was on. He then came across the intruder rifling through their closet. The next story change involved the staircase. Remember that Rick first said he was pushed down the stairs. Now he was saying he tripped down them. Most important to investigators was the gun story. The gun used to shoot Connie was a .357 Magnum. It was one of Rick's guns that he kept in the house. He first told investigators that he was unsure how the intruder got the gun from Connie. Now he said he saw Connie and the man wrestling for the gun. The man pulled it from Connie, and he then shot her. Oh, and the basement was also dark during all of this, apparently. Rick told investigators how he dragged himself up the stairs, still attached to the metal chair, after he regained consciousness. He found his cell phone and called for help, all while calling out to Connie, hoping she would call back. Rick's injuries were conveniently located. The wounds to his chest were only found on his left side, and the wounds to his legs were all within reach of his right hand. This piqued the investigators' interest. He also had no injuries that would suggest he had been pushed or fallen down the stairs. The dried blood from the box cutter marks hadn't dripped down the edges of his legs like you would expect if the wounds had been inflicted while he was sitting on the metal chair. The other inconsistency that stood out to investigators was the lack of blood leading up the stairs. If Rick had dragged himself from the basement to the kitchen, you would expect to see evidence of that. Instead, only droplets were found on that path, and the only drag marks were found in the kitchen. Rick seemed to have walked upstairs before collapsing in the kitchen. Investigators were also curious why Rick hadn't tried to check on Connie. The evidence shows he hadn't been near the body after she was shot, as the pool of blood near her body was undisturbed. Investigators wanted to find out exactly how an intruder was able to get into the home. They theorized they had entered through an open basement window, as the rest of the house showed no sign of forced entry. But even this didn't make sense. The locks on the basement window were removed from the inside and just left on the windowsill. An intruder wouldn't have been able to access these locks from outside without leaving significant damage. So why would Rick or Connie have removed these locks without immediately replacing them? It is customary for investigators to question those closest to a victim to get an idea of their life in general and any possible problems they were experiencing. After running through that morning's events, the investigators asked Rick about his relationship with Connie. He started off by saying things had been pretty good, but added that Connie was going through some things lately. She was battling with depression and had been noticeably easy to anger, something very unusual for the usually cheerful mom of two. Rick did say that Connie seemed to be slowly returning back to her old self, though. The investigators then bluntly asked Rick whether their investigation would reveal any problems in their relationship, to which Rick replied, yes and no. Rick revealed he had been having an affair, but he had an explanation for this. He claimed that both he and Connie were wanting to add another child to their family, but health problems were standing in the way of that. Connie was unable to conceive, and after several attempts, they decided to explore a different route. Rick told the investigators about Sarah, an old friend from high school who was newly divorced. Sarah also happened to want to have a child. Rick explained that the three of them, meaning Rick, Connie, and Sarah, got together and came up with a plan that Rick would get Sarah pregnant. Since the entire artificial insemination was so costly, the group agreed that Rick would sleep with Sarah and get her pregnant that way. He insisted that Connie agreed to the whole thing, even adding that was actually mainly her idea. So how would the parenting work? Apparently, all three of them would co-parent the child together. The investigators couldn't make sense of such a bizarre story and felt skeptical that Connie would agree to something like that. They asked Rick more questions about the situation, and yet again, his story started to shift. He told them that their baby was due in February 2016, but when asked whether Connie knew about the pregnancy, he wouldn't give the investigators a straight answer. If this had all been Connie's idea, surely she would have found out the good news as soon as Rick had. Rick then added that Connie and Sarah hadn't actually ever spoken. Yet again, this punched major holes in his story about Connie's involvement in the plan and their eventual co-parenting. By the end of the conversation, the real story came out. Rick had been unfaithful to Connie for years leading up to her passing. Sarah's pregnancy was also unplanned. The investigators didn't try to hide their disbelief. They told Rick that his entire story didn't make sense and added that the evidence at their home didn't match what he said happened that morning. He insisted he wasn't responsible for what happened to Connie. After hearing about Rick's affair, the investigators focused on tracking down Sarah. She was able to give them a statement later that same day. Sarah admitted to knowing that Connie and Rick were married, but said Rick had told her he was getting a divorce. Rick told Sarah that he and Connie had been unhappy for years and that the divorce was a mutual decision. Sarah found out she was pregnant on June 18, 2015, and waited until August to break the news to Rick. But when Rick found out, he told Sarah he had recently hired a divorce attorney. Like many other things had been, this was a lie. Sarah and Rick were still in an active relationship shortly before Connie lost her life, even traveling to Vermont in mid-December 2015. During this trip, the pair discussed how they would break the news to Connie. Rick wanted to wait until after the holidays to tell her. During subsequent conversations with Connie's closest friends, investigators discovered that Connie would never have accepted Rick having a child with another woman. Connie shared everything with her close friends, who said she never mentioned Sarah or the child's situation. She would have undoubtedly told them if she found out Rick was unfaithful. While Connie's friends were none the wiser to Rick's affair, Rick's friends, on the other hand, did know about Sarah and the pregnancy. He told a friend how much he loved Sarah and that he was afraid Connie would leave him. The entire investigation team was in a precarious position. From the get-go, though, they felt that Rick was involved in his wife's slaying. This was something they kept private from the public. To everyone outside of law enforcement, they believed that an intruder had broken in and taken Connie's life, leaving Rick injured. Those close to Rick hadn't even considered the possibility that he had something to do with Connie's passing, and they grieved alongside him. While they clearly had a main suspect, the investigators didn't want to lose focus on exploring all possibilities. The debates did have someone who would potentially want to hurt them. They had been involved in a long-standing legal battle with the contractor who worked on the house. Connie and Rick sued the man in small claims court after multiple problems with the contractor's work, and Connie had even expressed concern about her safety. The man was difficult to deal with, and Connie's car had even been vandalized twice in 2015. She believed the contractor was behind it. After these incidents, the debates installed their security system and purchased guns. The contractor even came up multiple times when friends of Connie and Rick were questioned after her passing. But this lead fell flat after the contractor was found to have an airtight alibi on the day of the crime, and he didn't at all match Rick's description of the intruder. While no one other than law enforcement suspected Rick was involved in Connie's demise, many people noted odd behavior from him. He didn't seem to be grieving how you would expect. Not long after the incident, Rick placed a message on the neighborhood group asking everyone where they liked to get takeout food. This seemed off for a man who had recently lost his wife in such traumatic circumstances. As investigators peeled back the layers of the debate's lives, they uncovered some glaring financial issues. Money was going out faster than was coming in, and Connie felt like all the responsibilities were resting on her shoulders. She told her close friend she was thinking about separating from Rick and even had a file on her notes app titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." The reasons ranged from Rick's lying to his poor treatment of her and not being a good father to the boys and focusing only on himself. Money is often a motive in cases like these. And in mid-January 2016, investigators found out about 2 life insurance policies for Connie and Rick. Each policy was for the hefty sum of $475,000. It turned out that only Connie's life insurance was still valid as Rick's had lapsed due to non-payment. Rick waited just 5 days to claim Connie's insurance money. He also received $75,000 from her employer a month after her passing. Over the next year, investigators slowly built their case against Rick Dubate. They executed multiple search warrants looking into both Rick and Connie's phone records, financial statements, communications with outside parties, security system data, and most importantly, Connie's Fitbit. Connie's Fitbit showed she had first been active at 7:52 a.m. on the morning of December 23rd. This was followed by an extended period of inactivity, consistent with Connie driving to the YMCA, the search warrant stated. We know Connie arrived at the YMCA as she was spotted on surveillance cameras. Then her Fitbit again registered another 10 minutes of inactivity when Connie was driving back home. She was back at the house at around 9:20 a.m. From 9:37 a.m. to 9:43 a.m., she was stationary. Investigators believe Connie was just resting during this time. The next 20 minutes saw Connie moving around like normal. During this time, Connie posted videos from her phone to Facebook with an IP address linked to her house. The last time Connie's Fitbit picked up any movement from her was at 10:05 a.m. So why was this so significant? This information provided concrete evidence that Connie's life was not taken at the time that Rick stated it had been. Connie was alive and moving until 10:05 a.m., an hour after Rick said he had witnessed the intruder take her life. Once they felt like they had enough evidence to convict Rick Dubate, authorities arrested him on April 14, 2017. He was charged with taking Connie's life, evidence tampering, and giving false statements to investigators. Rick pleaded not guilty to the charges. The police had a 50-page affidavit that included the Fitbit information, Rick's contradictions, and his affair with Sarah. The news of Rick's arrest rocked the close-knit community of Ellington. No one had given a thought to him being responsible. Even Connie's close friends, who she had spoken with about her marriage issues, thought many people go through difficulties without it ending like this. His bail was set at $1,000, which he posted immediately. Despite the mountain of evidence, it was a while before the case was actually taken to trial. It had been postponed twice before it kicked off on April 5, 2022. From his arrest to his trial, Connie's case received a lot of media attention. It became known as a case that was solved by a Fitbit, which Connie's family didn't approve of. They felt that it took the focus off of Connie to get a catchy headline. While it seemed like the prosecution had a clear-cut case, the defense was able to bring forward some damning information. Unidentified DNA had been found in the home in 6 separate places. This DNA coincides with Rick's story about the intruder starting off in their closet, moving down the stairs, and ending in the basement. The other evidence that the defense used was the gunshot residue found on Rick. The amount found on him was insignificant. You would expect there to be much more had he been the one to pull the trigger. The prosecution was able to counter this by explaining that the test had been administered hours after the trigger was pulled, meaning his hands could have easily been wiped or washed during that time. The prosecution stated a clear motive from the get-go. Rick's life was falling apart around him, with Sarah's pregnancy and Connie thinking about leaving him. Attorney Matthew C. Gdansky told juries, "Time is moving on. The pressure is mounting. The baby is coming, and the defendant's worst fears are going to be realized." Following the 5-week trial on May 10, 2022, the jury deliberated for 3 hours before reaching a verdict. Richard Dubate was guilty of all charges. Connie and her family finally got justice after 6.5 long years. Judge Corinne Klatt handed down a sentence of 65 years in prison. She called the crime a brutal, calculating, and incomprehensible act. She was only 1 year away from receiving the harshest punishment possible. Even though his attorney hinted that they would be appealing, it is likely that Richard will serve out the rest of his time in prison. Judge Klatt came to know Connie, who was a beautiful woman, during the trial. She was a devoted mother, a diligent worker, and many people's best friend. Without Connie, the world is genuinely a smaller place, as Judge Klatt so eloquently stated. Thanks for watching.